Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates, a podcast where we explore what is possible in the world of investing. You are in for an epic episode today. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you going?
I'm very good, Bryce. Very excited for this episode. As you said, it's going to be epic. We're joined by Matt Barrie, who is the founder and CEO of Freelancer, but he also holds the distinction of being our most watched YouTube video. We spoke to Matt, I think maybe last year, about I guess what's going on in Australia. Housing in particular got a lot of people talking, and we wanted to get Matt back on because he's written another great article and we wanted to unpack it. So Matt, welcome to Equity Mates.
Thanks for having me.
So the article we spoke about last time we spoke was The Great Australian Scream. Mm-hmm. You've written a follow-up called Put Another Aussie on the Barbie. If people want to read either article, we'll include both links in the show notes so they can read. But I guess let's just start generally. For people who haven't read it, you cover a lot. Housing, national identity, Australia's economy and economic complexity, energy policy. So for those who haven't read it, how would you sum up what you cover in the article?
The country's fucked.
And that's
next
We're done. Get off.
In what way?
It's not a functional society anymore. You need people to be able to afford to buy housing and shelter in order to have a functional society. And in Sydney now, I think the last time I looked at the median house price is about 1.8 million, which is mathematically impossible for the average person to buy the average house. I mean, I think Finder a few months ago, the front page of the Daily Telegraph, Finder did a study back then when I think that median house price is about 1.5, 1.6 million, where it said in Sydney, it takes now 46, 47 years to save for a deposit. Not the house, the deposit. So you can start at 20 years old, you can start saving for your deposit, get to 70 years old, and of course by then the house price has a zero on the end of it. I'm sure many people at the moment are trying to save for their mortgage or even just a deposit, and they're on a treadmill. Saving, just everything's just running away from them.
You just can't save as quickly as the prices are rising.
Well, you just do the math, right? And unfortunately, we're past overtime, and we're past injury time, and we're into the point where you just run the numbers. You go to the Commonwealth Bank mortgage repayment calculator, and I don't know what they're doing home loans at the moment, 6-point-something% or so, 6.5% or something like that. And you feed in, you take 1.8 million, you take the 20% deposit off, which I don't know where that's coming from, and then you feed it into a 30-year repayment schedule, and it's something like $9,000 a month after tax that you've got to pay for a home loan for 30 years. How does that make sense? Right. So as a result of that cascades into everything. So it cascades into the cost to run a business, because businesses have to pay rent, but they also have to pay salaries. And it was actually funny, last night I went through Woolworths and I looked at my little tiny bag of groceries that cost $100, and there's like barely one meal in there. There's like a meat pie and just random stuff. I won't tell your listeners what watches what I had to dinner, because it was pretty awful. But there was a box of Nurofen and a box of Hydrolite, and no, it wasn't having a big night. But I looked at it and I go, it's 40 cents a tablet for Nurofen. Now obviously I bought the brand, not the generic, and that was my mistake. And the Hydrolite, 60 cents a tablet. I thought, this is just, how does it get to these prices? Surely, what's the cost of production for these sort of things? And then someone actually, when I tweeted it, replied going, well, the guy stacking the boxes on the shelves needs to be able to afford $1 million house. Right? And so the cost of land filters into everything. It filters into the cost to hire people, wages. We've got the highest casual wages in the world, I think at $24.10, but nobody can live on those wages anywhere near where they work, right? So we trick a lot of people to come into the country with the promise of a better life. They work for a little while in the cafe, realize they can't make it work either, move way out to, I don't know, Minto or somewhere to try and hold them for dear life, living in bunk beds with a bunch of other students, trying to hope for the dream. So, it's Lee Kuan Yew from Singapore said on its founding that he soon realized that nobody would fight for the country unless they had the ability to own their own home, and so basically that was his priority, is to put a shelter over everyone's head. And in this country now, it is impossible in many parts of the country for the average person to do that, and so this is going to lead to a social catastrophe. It's going to lead to all sorts of problems. and social unrest. And if you look at what's happened all around the world in property markets, they've blown up into a bubble, whether it's in the GFC in the United States, in the UK, in Portugal, Spain, Greece, you name it. You don't have a soft landing, you have a horrible landing. And we have blown a bubble, the mother of all bubbles. We've blown the mother of all bubbles, which has led to the mother of all cost of living crises, which has led to huge problems in a deterioration of the society, culture, and values of this country. Through running the mother of all mass immigration programs, and the politicians have a lot to answer for because it's not really working out for the people coming into the country either.
So let's continue drilling down on housing. A lot of us are familiar with the numbers, but for those that are just tuning in for the first time, can you talk us through how cooked the housing situation actually is? Give us an overview, and I guess also how it's come to this point over the last 15, 20 years.
Well, I mean, we have been on a huge building spree for, 20-something years. Since the Sydney Olympics, we've been building apartments everywhere. In fact, it's kind of funny. I originally wrote an article on the lockout laws back in 2016. Before that, I wasn't really that politically minded. It's just when I turned up to my favourite venue and it would shut down forever. And then I went to my favourite restaurant and it had shut down forever. And then the taxi drivers are complaining they don't have any work anymore. And my friends who are musicians are out of work, etc. And I thought, what the hell is going on in this country? And really, it's the same narrative that's been going on for a long period of time. Back then it was like they were trying to shut down King's Cross because of what they called alcohol-fueled violence. Two people unfortunately lost their lives. They were hit, ironically, outside of venues. One was about 9:30 at night by someone who was running around who had drank half a case of vodka sodas, been issued a move-on order by police, didn't do that, punched someone in the back of the head, and tragically they fell over and died. But it was outside a venue. And then someone else tried selling drugs to a bodybuilder's girlfriend on New Year's Eve outside Hugo's. The bodybuilder turned around, punched him, fell over, hit his head, also tragically died, but had nothing to do with being inside a venue. But so you're trying to understand what the hell is going on there. But of course, we were trying to knock down everything we could to build apartment blocks. And I thought, at the same time, this is a bit strange because George Soros had just come out, who was the tourism minister, and said that Sydney is the safest and friendliest city in the world. So this is a bit strange. What's going on here? And it turns out that it was basically for property development, also for casino patronage. But it's really the same narrative, which has gone on for a very long period of time, because the question basically and fundamentally is, apartments for who? Now, we've got this, everything in the media right now has something to do with property. There's a few reasons for that. One is we obviously have this cost of living crisis, but also the media in this country are completely captured by property because Domain is owned by Fairfax. And I think last time I looked, it was about 34% of the market cap, although it's probably substantially changed since then, but it's a substantial portion of the market cap goes into that. And then News Limited, REA, last time I looked, again was a long time ago, was at 70-something% of the market cap. And so they're completely captured. So we'll win a gold medal in the Olympic Games, and there'll be an article, what does this mean for Australian property? Right? Yeah. It'll be like always, like the narrative is out like crazy, right? And so all you're hearing about is property. That's the discussion that people, just live and die by in this country and so forth. But you kind of think to yourself, why? If we're on this massive home building spree, in fact, we are the second in the world for a developed nation globally in the amount of housing we build, both on a per capita basis and also as a percentage of housing stock basis. So we're on this massive building binge. In fact, so crazy is that no one actually checks the numbers, right? There's an index called the Ryder-Levitt-Bucknell Index, which publishes a quarterly, it's riveting reading, by the way, it's a quarterly index on how many cranes there are in the world. And last report I saw, there was 882 cranes in Australia building things. About 80% are being used to build residential apartments, right? By comparison, and Sydney alone has about 400 cranes operating. By comparison, New York has 8, right? And then you go through all the cities like Chicago. I think Chicago's got 5, right? And in fact, Sydney has more cranes. And I rattled off, that essay I published, by the way, I just gave a speech at the Australian Institute of Progress, and that the actual video is going viral for those that don't want to read 80 minutes of me ranting about stuff. There's actually a video on YouTube and a video on X that about 200,000 people have watched now that I'll supply you the links. But I ranted off, I don't know, there's like 20 cities in the US, and these are major cities like Portland and San Francisco and New York and so forth. And Sydney has more cranes than all of them, right? In fact, we've got a substantial percentage of the world's cranes just here building apartment blocks. So you think to yourself, if we're on this massive home building spree, why is that? Why are we still in a massive crunch in terms of the ability to find housing, and why is it so expensive? I mean, where's the baby boom? Who's actually having a lot of babies, right? Every Australian woman has to have 2.1 children to maintain the population, right? We haven't been above 2.1 since 1976, so that's about 50 years, right? So why do we need to build so many apartments? In fact, our fertility rate right now is 1.63 and dropping like a rock, because every time home prices go up 10%, HSBC have shown that the birth rate drops by 1%. So the birth rate's just going down, 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 down as we're being shoved into these dog boxes and smaller apartments and hanging on for dear life and so forth. But the remarkable thing, and I think the really eye-opening thing, is that what would you think the latent demand for additional housing is in Australia from Australians?
No idea.
Yeah, no idea.
I'll give the answer, and it will probably surprise you. The additional demand for housing from Australians that's required is zero. There is no demand for additional housing from Australians.
And so what you mean by that is like the Australians the demand from Australians is offset by the supply of Australians who are like moving out of their houses or dying or something like that.
We have the fertility rate is about 1.63 at the moment and dropping like a rock. So we don't have a baby boom. And in fact, if you let that play out, the population will shrink. Yeah. We haven't been above the replacement rate for 50 years. There is a thing known as population momentum, where you have a baby boom and then that kind of flows through the system, even though fertility rate has subsequently dropped. But that usually plays out over a generation, maybe 20, 25 years, 30 years. It's been 50 years, right? We are living longer. We're living about 10 years longer than we did back in 1976, but that's about a 14% increase in lifespan. But the birth rate has dropped by 22%. So there is actually no demand for additional housing in this country. Zero, nothing, like zilch, which is pretty shocking, I think, probably to most people, given the fact they're probably hanging on for dear life trying to rent or pay their mortgage. The demand is entirely from a completely out of control, unhinged and uncalibrated mass immigration program. A mass immigration program where some months we bring 100,000 people into the country. A mass immigration program where of a country of 26 million people, there are 2.4 million people in this country on temporary visas. A mass immigration program where we send overseas per year 12,000 students to go study, and we have 800,000 in the country studying here, where there are only 6.4 million international students in the world, according to UNESCO, that actually leave their country to go study in another country. So we have 12% of the global international student population sitting here in 2 or 3 cities in Australia, where those international students in some local government areas will consume 24% of the available rental capacity. I think it's in Melbourne, LGA, I think it's 21%. In Sydney, just here, it's 15% of housing is consumed by international students, right? We've got a completely out of control program.
So I want to hold on what you were talking about there about how much we build, because I think that surprises a lot of people. And I actually pulled a quote from your article because it did surprise me so much. So Australia has the 4th highest rate of home building for a major country in the developed world.
It's actually second.
And then second behind Switzerland, number of new homes per capita built in the last decade. So it's not like a short term we're building a lot because of the crisis. We've been building a lot for a while.
Yes.
And yet the political debate at all levels of government is we're going to build our way out of this. The policy solutions, we're going to do a national home building fund to build our way out of this. What do you have to say to the politicians?
Well, they're operating something which I'll describe in a very nice way as a Ponzi scheme, but it's actually worse than a Ponzi scheme. It's a Ponzi scheme in the fact that there's no economic utility really in residential houses at this point in time, because the yield generated from rent is way below anything to be able to generate a return, right? So we for years have run in this country because the politicians don't really know how to grow the economy and really grow industry, or actually really do anything other than dig up raw materials out of the ground and ship it overseas, and that's it. They've been running what they've been boasting, and this is over successive governments of both sides, both the Liberal and the Labor Party, a program where it's been focused on what they call easy, relentless growth. So as long as house prices gently drift up, and as long as wages are gently suppressed, businesses are happy, and the citizens are happy. And that's been running for some time, but that's only facilitated by running a very large immigration program. So you're bringing people into the country which suppress wages, and then those people need housing, and so you just gently drift houses up while you gently suppress wages. And that's been, as Matthias Cormann called it, a feature of our economic architecture that they boasted about, right? And that ran for a very long period of time. Of course, you can't run that forever. Of course, when Albanese came in, he actually was quite against this. He actually said that we're bringing too many people into the country. I think that's 160,000 per year. He said was too many, and it shouldn't be used as a replacement to train Australians for jobs, right? It's the Workers' Party, the Labor Party. You should be able to have our citizens trained for jobs and skilled up in various areas and so forth. Of course, as soon as he got in, he did the opposite. He actually put it into full Burko mode, where that ramped up to bringing in a Canberra and a Darwin per year. And if you think about it in those terms, how could we possibly build a Canberra and a Darwin per year? And you've got to remember that at the same time we're doing that, it's not just housing you have to build. You have to build all the infrastructure. Yeah. You have to build hospitals and schools and roads and transport. And so, while the federal government is very happy kind of pushing that sort of program, it's the state governments that pick up the bill for that. And so they've been on a massive building spree. We've got the metro that just opened here in Sydney. You've got all the things that have been happening down in Victoria, which has basically driven the states to bankruptcy, to the point of bankruptcy, because they've got to pick up the bill for all of that. But he pushed it into complete overdrive. He pushed it into a rate where I think back in February, where it was over 100,000 people in a month came in on with permanent long-term arrivals, and you've got to think to yourself, well, why is he doing this in a cost of living crisis? An extreme cost of living crisis. And then you've got to look at it from the perspective of, well, the really remarkable thing is that there's no job creation in this country outside of the NDIS. So if you look at, since December 2022, the job creation that's happened in this country, there are only 165,000 jobs that were created outside of the NDIS itself. And of those jobs that are created outside the NDIS, they were created to run the Ponzi scheme, because they're either created in education at these bullshit vet providers in the city that are stacked 20 per building that provide education where attendance is optional, and the quality of the education is probably worse than the back of a Kellogg's cornflake packet. Literally ghost colleges. Yeah. Or they're working in government programs administering the Ponzi itself, or they're working in programs to support services such as migration. So we're importing migrants to work as migration agents. Oh, gee, what could happen there that could possibly go wrong? Perhaps a completely out of control program that's completely backed up with people appealing, trying to leave the country or seeking asylum and so forth, because they have to leave at the end of study or what have you. Or they're doing rehabilitation in arts, in recreational services for the NDIS. I mean, I work in the technology industry. I mean, can you imagine how many jobs have been created in the technology industry since December 2022? And that report came out, I think it was about an 18-month report. I mean, how many jobs do you think in this great technology boom, AI fueled, have been created in the 18 months from December 2022?
I feel like you were going to say none, but it's just crazy to think that, given everything.
It's 177 in the entire country.
177.
What?
When you think about just like the companies that have got bigger, like Canva alone, I would have thought had created more than 177.
Yeah, I was actually with Cliff last week. They do, but they hire people around the world, and the jobs that they're creating are being lost by all the startups going bust.
Yeah,
because we're actually in a bit of a winter at the moment in terms of funding for startups. I mean, you can probably, most people listening to this that anecdotally can probably tell how many of their friends are working in startups that got funded recently, and how many are doing layoffs, and how many tech companies have gone bust recently, right? I mean, finance is negative. Retail is negative, which is weird given the fact that we're increasing the population by, 100,000 a month some months. Why is retail negative? Wholesale trade is negative. Manufacturing is negative. It's all running negative. Construction is running mass insolvencies at the moment because, and I went to a dinner actually that some developers, some financial providers around developers ran recently, and simply they can't build apartments at a price that people can afford to buy, right? I mean, the numbers just don't make any sense anymore. So you're running a mass immigration program into a country where there's no jobs other than working for the Ponzi or working in NDIS. It's about $42 billion a year at the moment for the NDIS, but if you add up the other social programs we provide around disability, it's about $80 billion a year, which is twice the rate that the UK and Canada spend at. It's completely out of control, and NDIS alone is forecast to hit $100 billion. And even Bill Shorten, who just quit,
I was going to say,
it's all too hard. Even he came out and said, well, people are spending on cryptocurrency, they're spending on sex, they're spending on, we caught one group of 20 trying to go to Japan for, presumably a ski holiday. It was completely out of control, this program. So that's it. We have no job creation in this country. We've got huge supply that's being created. And in my article, by the way, I got it wrong. There's actually, if you look at the countries, Turkey is ahead of us in terms of home building. And then the other countries, which I don't really consider as major countries, places like Costa Rica, of course, New Zealand's a very small country, et cetera and so forth. So we're actually second in both the per capita and in the actual percentage of housing stock.
Wow. Okay.
Wow. So in your 2023 article, Matt, you said it's not a question of if, but when this housing bubble pops. Now, we could have been saying this for the last decade, if not more.
I was saying it for the last decade.
We could say it for the next decade.
Yeah.
What's causing the popping? How do you see this unfolding?
Well, it turns out, government intervention kicked the can down the road a long time, right?
Yeah.
So in 2017, I said this is just completely out of control, and of course, it's now 2024, and people say, "Well, Matt, you're wrong because because you get the timing wrong. You're incorrect in your thesis." But it turns out, the government came in. If you step back a little bit, the global financial crisis, the Australian banks are already twice as leveraged to residential housing as the American banks, and 3 times the UK banks, and 4 times the Hong Kong banks. Now, Hong Kong has the most expensive property market in the world because it's a tiny little island off the coast of the most populous country in the world. That's a really nice place to live. That's really restricted in terms of what you can do in terms of building and new supply. But we at that point in time, when the GFC hit, the Australian banks were actually insolvent. And the government had to step in to lend their AAA rating in order to guarantee, because the Australian banks are totally dependent upon US funding, basically foreign funding, in order to function. So the government stepped in and intervened. We increased, I think, the first homeowners bonus. In fact, there's some Treasury notes in my article where they literally panicked and said the housing market will fall over unless we do something. And since then, they just ramped up immigration. They really pumped up the program and ramped up the number of people coming in, which for a while worked really well, because when it was mostly Chinese coming in, they had money. Obviously when Ant Financial was on the road to going public, he said some things that looked ostensibly fairly benign to me, but that was not taken very well by the powers that be. And since then, he just dropped out of life and looks like he's been like electro-shocked on those nipples with a car battery or something, because he's now very quiet and doesn't really say very much, and so forth. And there was also a Disney actress as well who disappeared, who was very, very wealthy, and so on. So you just know that if you make a lot of money, you get out of China. Now, it's always been illegal for Chinese to send more than $50,000 overseas per year, but it hasn't been strictly enforced, or there's been ways around it, such as at one point in time, 97% of Bitcoin volume was actually just money getting out of China. You can see it on the website called fiatleak.com, the flows, or it went through the casinos. Surprise, surprise, that there is actually no viable business model for the casinos in Australia outside of money coming out of China and being washed into the Australian property market, right? How many of your friends have been to Crown? Other than to check out a restaurant.
You mean the new
gaming.
fancy crowd?
Yeah.
We got an Uber there and we were told we were at the wrong casino this one time.
We went high roller enough.
I literally know no one. I don't have a single one of my friends that I know of that has actually been to the gaming floor and crowd. Right? Because the entire business model was junket money out of China, as it was in British Columbia. And so when I saw that actually happen in British Columbia, Canada's ahead of us in many different things. It's ahead of us in the property market, and it's ahead of us in terms of what's happening in immigration. But a little bit earlier on, they caught people laundering money through the British Columbia casinos. And at the time I was tweeting going, "Do you wonder how long it will take before people figure this out?" There's probably the same thing happening in Australia, and probably the same thing happening in New Zealand. Right, anywhere the food, air, and water won't kill you. Right, you make money in China, you get it out, whether it's through casinos or through Bitcoin or through breaking it down and smurfing it out into Hong Kong and so on. And then you stick it in the new Swiss bank account, which is property in Canada, New Zealand, or Australia. Australia is particularly attractive. In fact, it's the worst money laundering property market in the world, according to Transparency International, because you don't need to KYC. You buy a house, they don't need to check your ID, and it's capital gains tax free. Or we've got if it's your primary residence, and so you can send your son or your nephew or someone masquerading to be your son and nephew or what have you to go into the Australian educational system, which is really easy. And then it turns out international students can buy houses. There's someone tweeting about it right now last night. If not, it's pretty easy to go from being a student straight into PR. And then you buy a house, and then eventually you do family reunification. The money comes across. It's capital gains tax free. There's no KYC, and it's government sponsored. It's government sponsored because the last 60 something years that's been the trade. Government has been pursuing easily relentless growth, which is gently trending up house prices. Most people are happy because 1/3 of people own their own home outright. 1/3 are on a mortgage and they're happy they bought previously because the house prices are gently drifting up. And 1/3 are renters who are a bit unhappy. So as long as house prices gently drift up and wages are gently suppressed, everyone is generally happy in the country.
Now that's probably the nuance and that's probably sparked a lot of the frustration of the last few years. Is there's no more gentle drifting when it comes to house prices. No. It feels like gentle left the building like 5 years ago. So what changed? Just rate of immigration?
I'll build up to what I think is actually really going on. But before I get there...
Wow, we haven't hit that yet?
No. But before we get there, you've got to realise that everyone is in on the Ponzi. Everyone's in on the Ponzi, right? So the media companies are in the Ponzi because they own the property classifieds, the property portals, right? But then you look at the ASX 100, and the ASX 100 is completely all in on the Ponzi with the exception of mining. Because the ASX 100, you've got to think about it. Australians are up to their eyeballs in debt. I mean, last time I looked, I think household debt to GDP was 211% or something or other. So it was something like second in the world. So Australians are completely up to their gills in debt and can't borrow anymore. So how do the banks grow their revenue? If they can't get Australians to borrow any more money, because you've got to remember, the banks have one product. Residential mortgages. They don't do anything else. Have you tried getting a business loan?
No.
Right? They lend very little to businesses by comparison. And personal finance, there's no ability to borrow there because everyone's up to the gills in mortgages. So the only way the banks can grow their revenue is to bring more people into the country. Then you've got to look at the rest of construction. People really only live in one home. Some might be lucky to have a second home, but how do you grow construction? You've got to grow people, get more people into the country to grow that, right? And so on. So you go through all those different, insurance. How do you sell more car insurance? Well, people don't really buy more than one car. Some people might be lucky enough to do that, but how do you grow insurance? Well, you've got to have more people in the country to get more home insurance and more car insurance and da-da-da-da. So the ASX 100, with the exception of mining, and is pretty much geared up that the only way that will grow is through more people in the country. Qantas, how do they sell more air travel? Well, you kind of need more people in the country, or either more tourists coming in or more people in the country going backwards and forwards, right? And so that's why Alan Joyson is buddy with Albo. And so the ASX 100 is completely in on the Ponzi. The construction industry in this country is huge. That's all in on the Ponzi. Real estate in this country is nuts. For fun one day, I actually, after I had breakfast with a mate of mine, I said, let's see how many real estate agents there are in Double Bay, because there seems to be a lot. Everywhere you look is a real estate agent. We counted 42. I've got the photos of all of them. I'll maybe put it on Twitter at some point. I get bored. And so real estate's completely out of control, right? And so just every major industry really in this country, with the exception of a couple, involved in natural resource extraction, is involved in the Ponzi. The media is in on the Ponzi. The government's in on the Ponzi. Everyone's in on the Ponzi.
But right? if you believe that, so if everyone's in on the Ponzi, how are you so confident that it'll all be unwound?
Because math. Their wages going up.
Not
right?
fast enough, yeah.
No. Like we're facing the biggest decline in real disposable income in the developed world right now. Taxes in the last year went up 7.6%, which is the highest in the developed world, and disposable income went down 6.1%. Right? Everyone knows. I mean, you go to the pub and try and buy a beer, and it's what, $18 a pint now, right? Everyone knows the price of everything's going through the roof. I've got my steak at the pub index.
Yeah, I was about to say.
What we talked about last time. It used to be $10 for a steak down the pub. Yeah. Then it was like $40. Then it was $50. Then it was $70. Sometimes I see $90. We talk about that being the special, right? Like, so everyone knows the price of everything's going through the roof, and wages are not going really anywhere. Because if you think, as I said before, there's no job creation. If there's no job creation in this country outside of the Ponzi or outside of the NDIS, why would wages be going up? Jobs are being destroyed. There's a lot of people looking for work. And so wages are not going up because companies don't need to really lift wages and can't afford to, right? Unless you're selling into an overseas market or you're somehow growing by selling into overseas markets, you've got no capacity to pay anymore for wages. And so you've got a crisis where the actual value of money that people are receiving in their wages compared to what they can purchase is being turned into confetti, and house prices are in a parabola that are totally and completely out of control.
And so you're just saying that we're slowly grinding towards demand destruction.
We are slowly going towards default correlation, which is that moment in the movie Big Short where Steve Carell was at the strip club. The stripper's dancing around the pole. She's bought 5 houses and a condo on adjustable rate mortgages at 2%. And what was the rate during COVID? 1.95% in Australia. Who suddenly, Steve goes, do you realize that these mortgages are reset to 7 or 8% when you come off the teaser period? Right, and boom, that's what's happening. They're resetting to 6.5%, 7%, maybe 8% now in Australia, and it's happened all around the world. You have like this big resetting in the price of a mortgage, and at some point, everyone just goes, "Wow, I can't afford to pay my rent anymore, or I can't afford to pay the mortgage anymore." And this is not an isolated event. It happens with correlation everywhere, where everyone just goes, "That's it, can't do it." And the second quarter of last year is when we had this big reset starting to cascade through the banking system, where people reset off the COVID mortgages. And of course, Bubble O'Phil, the RBA governor, told everyone that mortgages wouldn't lift above essentially 0% until end of 2024. And of course, it did happen much quicker. So everyone loaded themselves the gills with borrowing, and that started to reset in the second quarter of last year, and has been resetting ever since. Now, you kind of wonder, well, that was the moment everywhere around the world that you start having a bit of a catastrophe. And so why hasn't happened just yet? Well, I think it is pretty close to happening. I think what has been happening, at least anecdotally, what I've been hearing from my friends who work in the banks, is the banks are very forgiving. They don't want to trigger anything. Like, you can't afford to pay. Well, how much can you pay? Let's just kind of roll it over, and so on and so forth. Although I have seen some stats on foreclosures that have come out, and they are going up fairly dramatically. But I think we're at the point where we're past overtime, we're past injury time, we are into we're rubber hits the road now.
Yeah.
You just look at unfortunately, it's just math. Yeah. And that's it.
It's interesting because, everyone heard about the upcoming mortgage cliff and people rolling off COVID rates into the variable rates. And there was a lot of panic at the time. And then it feels like people have rolled over and the banks have just reported their latest results. And there doesn't seem to be any concern there. But you reckon it's...
Well, meanwhile, the banks are doing mass layoffs. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I just think it's basically here.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's widely reported on because the media companies don't have a vested interest running the property portals. It's just anecdotally, you just walk down the street and see the cafes going bust. You've got all these record number of people coming into the country. You think cafes will be doing really well, right? But they're going bust. Shops here, there, everywhere are going bust. Construction companies are falling over every day. It's just, you just do your own research, look around, use your brain. Things look like they're not great, right?
So I guess then the question becomes, a lot of people listening to this are trying to become first home buyers. What do you say to them?
Well, you can buy a house in the south of France for about 600,000 euros that has 14 bedrooms. It's quite nice. In fact, yesterday there's a funny Instagram account, which I'm not sure if it's black satirical comedy or reality. It's called $1 Million Listings. It's run by the real estate agency industry. And it's a penthouse that just sold for $22 million in Bondi. Now it's off beach. It set a record for an off beach penthouse, and it's very nice. It's a very nice thing. It's above, I think, Bondi Hardware. So if you want to listen to people stumbling it out of there and live above it, great. It's $22 million, and I thought, what else could you buy for $22 million? So I did a bit of Googling last night of some things you could buy. Well, you could buy a 30,000 dry weight ton cargo container ship. It's secondhand, but that would set you back 14 million Australian. You could also, you'd have to park that off Bondi, probably a little bit further away to avoid the mooring fees. So you could buy a Bell 505 Jet Ranger X helicopter for $3 million to fly you there and back. Once you've arrived, you could buy a 67 Ferrari, a 2021 model G-Wagon, a 2022 McLaren. Right, you could pay for kids' school fees in both Cranbrook and Askham from years 7 to 12, and you could buy a 14-bedroom country house in the south of France, and just have a bit of money left over, or you could buy this penthouse. Right, now, the other thing I found you could buy was again, this is secondhand, but you can buy a 525-foot cruise ship. That holds 1,400 passengers with 480 berths with its own casino. And I thought maybe that would be cool. Instead of buying the apartment in Bondi, you could buy this cruise ship. And it's a proper P&O cruise line size ship. You could put it out in international waters and run your own casino and just run the Jet Ranger backwards and forwards and probably make a bit of income. Now, someone complained, but that ship was made in 1992. It's a bit old. I said, no problem. I found a place that will make you a 160-foot 2025 model, brand new 80-berth cruise ship for the same price, actually $18 million. Okay. So look, the numbers don't make any sense. There's a lot of things. Look, fundamentally, there's a bunch of things that don't make sense in this country, right? Why do we have 12% of the international student population? In fact, we have 15% of the international student population from very poor countries in this country. They're not IIT students. They are, even the people that failed to get into IIT. They're a lot are basically unskilled workers. We've got 880 cranes in this country operating. How does that make any sense whatsoever? Why are we bringing 100,000 people a month into this country, and why do we have 2.4 million people on temporary visas? The country, 26 million people, in this cost of living crisis. Why are we? Do we have all these people in the country studying English language in a cost of living crisis? We've got 250,000 people in vet programs studying management and commerce and garbage educational quality leadership courses in colleges in C-grade office space. There are just all these things that don't make any sense.
Well, Matt, we've covered a lot of ground. So to close it out, if we're going to put you in the seat of Prime Minister for a day, what would you be proposing is the solution to, I guess, some of the major things that you've covered off today?
How do we unwind all of this?
Well, would you agree or not agree that the wealth of Australians is eroding rapidly?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? And the GDP per capita is eroding rapidly. right? So we're in a situation right now where we should be the richest country in the world, and we were the richest country in the world in 1900. So we discovered gold in Ballarat in like 1853 or something rather. That led to a gigantic gold rush through the late 1800s in this country. We are a huge producer of natural resources, so sheep and beef and grain and so forth. And you can just walk around Melbourne and look at the buildings, right? In 1900, Melbourne was the richest city in the world. Full stop. The second richest city in the world was Buenos Aires. Now, the two countries of Australia and Argentina took very different paths from 1900 onwards. Argentina went down the path of socialism, right, and ended up in a complete disastrous situation. I have an office in Buenos Aires, and, so I know very much what goes on in that country. And it's recently corrected itself with Malay, and in fact, I think for the first time in many years, they've actually had a month where there's no food inflation. But normally the inflation is completely and utterly out of control, and you've got to adjust wages every month, and this at the other end is a very destabilizing place to live and so forth. And then we went down the other path, right? And for a while, Australia was a great place to live, and we had manufacturing, for example, as a substantial portion of the GDP of this country. We made cars, we made a bunch of different things. We had whole supply chains for various things. And then we just went into this path of just easy, relentless growth, where it was just, house prices drifting up and shipping iron ore and coal and gas and gold overseas. You would think a country with 1,200 years of coal supply would be an energy superpower. You would think a country with 28% of the world's uranium reserves would be an energy superpower. You would think a country with 20% of the world's gas exports, sometimes number one in the world for gas exports, sometimes number two in the world for gas exports, would be an energy superpower. You would think a country with 3.46 people per square kilometre would have cheap land and cheap housing, right? You would think a country that has, well, what is it, something like, we're third in the world for production of cobalt. We have 47% of the world's lithium production. We are fifth in the world for the production of, sixth in the world for production of copper, fifth in the world for the production of nickel. You'd think we'd be an energy and electronic and mechanical engineering superpower. We control 56% of the world's iron ore exports. You would think we'd be a steel superpower. We have cheap energy and we have abundant iron ore, and we turn that and elaborately transform that and other materials we have to become an export powerhouse. We should be the richest country in the world. Full stop. We have everything, right? But instead, we have the greatest erosion of wealth in the developed world, right? We have a cost of living crisis that is the mother of all cost of living crises. We have house pricing that is astronomically expensive. It doesn't make any sense anywhere in the world. A terrace house in Wallara is the same price as a cruise ship. It's literally a 2025 model 160-foot cruise ship or an $18 million terrace in Wallara. And it's a nice terrace, but I mean, come on, let's get some reality. And this is all the root cause of this cost of living crisis, the cost of land, and the root cause of that is mass immigration. We have the most expensive casual wages in the world, but again, it's not enough to live on. But that's caused because people need somewhere to live. And then we have an energy crisis because we stupidly are going down this path of, what about the environment, this, that, the other, we can't burn coal, etc. No, we're burning the coal. Every single thing we're digging out of the ground is being burnt. It's just being burnt by China or it's being burnt by Japan, right? It's all being shipped overseas and burnt. We're deluding ourselves that we think we're doing anything by not burning it here. Completely deluding ourselves. The gas we send overseas, in many cases, is being re-exported. We send it to Japan, they don't sell it, right? And now we're actually going to import gas in the Eastern Seaboard, which is ludicrous because we don't have a gas reservation scheme, right? So we have a cost of living crisis caused by input costs such as land and wages, which comes back to land. We have an energy crisis through very poor energy policy, where we'll export all the raw materials to build renewable generators, which are energy negative on the energy that's consumed to get the materials out of the ground, which ship back to us are unreliable, which we can't, and as a result of such, we can't run a reliable manufacturing industry in this country. Manufacturing as a percentage of gross value add is 5.39%. which is on par with Botswana, where you go see cheetahs. It's on par with Liechtenstein, which is a financial haven. It has dropped from about 15, 16, 17, 18, 19% to 5%. It's about 1/3 what of the average is for the OECD. We literally, this country is going to hell in a handbasket. We are 93rd in the Harvard Economic Complexity Index in terms of the complexity of things that we produce and how sophisticated they are and how much people can replicate them. Our economy, in terms of sophistication and complexity, is on par with Equatorial Guinea, where they don't have a cinema in the entire country, right? And so it is all being caused by government policy, which can be turned around on a dime, right? I believe immigration needs to be cut 90% because it's completely, the skilled migration program is not skilled. On the confident on list for skilled migration right now, which are the people we absolutely have to bring in the country, are yoga instructors.
What?
We signed a free trade agreement with India, which has a provision for 1,800 yoga instructors per year coming in, right? If you go to the Yoga Australia's website, there are only 2,000 yoga instructors in the entire country. Right? On the confident off list are farmers, microbiologists, and I think genetic engineering. Right? Like it's absolutely ludicrous. So the skilled migration program is completely uncalibrated. So you need to bring it down by about 90%, right? Until you figure out what's going on. Now we do have one good program in immigration in this country. It's called the Global Talent Program, and I brought someone in on that program, and that's the program that people would normally think would be skilled immigration, such as you bring in people who are electrical engineers, or you bring in computer scientists, or you're bringing in AI researchers or clean energy researchers, or whatever it may be. You're bringing those people in. That program last year brought in 5,000 people. This year it's being reduced to 4,000 people. This is actually what people think of as skilled immigration. I think it's a good program, but it's being reduced and it's de minimis, right? But you do need to bring it right down until you get a balance, and you need every person in this country to be able to afford a house over their head to live and to own, and not be a renter stuck on a treadmill or a mortgage on a treadmill. They're trying to increase the size of the army from 60,000 people to 80,000 people, but already they're 7% below their recruiting targets. Why? Because nobody wants to fight for this country anymore, right? Why do they not want to fight for the country anymore? Because you can't afford to live and put a roof over your family's heads. If you go off to war, you'll come back, you won't be able to afford housing. And not just that, but in New South Wales and in Victoria in 2021, 31% of the people weren't born here, right? And in fact, in the 30 to 44 demographic, because the overall numbers get skewed because young kids typically don't get counted because, of course, they come in with their parents and so forth. It's like 40-something% of the population in that demographic in Sydney and Melbourne, or New South Wales and Victoria, are foreign born. And in fact, for some demographics, it's over 50%. So you need to bring the immigration numbers down until you get some balance in the cost of living crisis, particularly in land prices. You need to have a gas reservation scheme in order to not have this stupid thing where we export all this gas overseas and we're a gas superpower and have it resold. You need to restart coal, right? Because you can't delude yourself and think it's not being burnt. It's being burnt by someone else, right? So it should not be delusional. In fact, there should be an infrastructure fee on people coming to the country that are not contributing sufficient income taxes. Australian government spends $640 billion a year on providing services. All the infrastructure we need in order to live in this society, which is about $25,000 a year, is what you and I pay ultimately through our taxes on average to fund, basically this great country we live in. At the moment, students, when they're bringing in $29,000 a year, which isn't being checked and they're earning it here, how are they really contributing that to society? They're not. And in fact, what we're doing, it's about face in terms of what a normal egalitarian system should be. I mean, they should be sponsoring us because they've got the ability to come here, get a great education, etc., which will help them in the future life, and ultimately there's a pathway potentially to living here. But there should be an infrastructure fee. If we're spending $25,000 a year, we shouldn't be subsidising unskilled partners coming in. They should be sponsoring us, subsidising us. So maybe a reasonable place to start would be $50,000 a year as an infrastructure fee. Right? It should be at least $25,000, which is what we're paying. So it should be somewhere higher than that. So I would think about that. We have to get manufacturing running again in this country. For all you talk about the tech industry and this, that, the other, it's a drop in the ocean compared to manufacturing. And a lot of the manufacturing comes from small businesses. So you need to have small businesses able to function, right? And to do that, you've got to fix the energy problem. You've got to fix the land cost problem. You've got to find a way where small businesses can thrive in this country, and small businesses going bankrupt hand over fist, right? You've got to have access to capital. You've got access to skills. You know, we missed a big opportunity during COVID, where we got paid JobKeeper and got everyone to sit their bums at home, when we could have stuck everyone into educational programs. And I'm not talking about just university. I'm talking about the trades. I'm talking about skilled trades, you know, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing techniques, all the things that make America strong. You know, you watch online, you watch those classic car restoration, you know, thing, and the quality of the general tradesman in America is very strong in terms of their ability to make things and create things and so forth. It's a very diversified economy. And we have a very lopsided, horrible economy that needs to be diversified. And the only way we'll do that is by bringing back manufacturing. And you can only do that. You can't do that credibly unless the input costs come down and you've got reliable energy to do so. And we've got to make nuclear legal. It's illegal both in the federal and the state level. And they go, well, we don't know if it's going to work in Australia. Well, it's working in Bangladesh, so I guarantee it will work here, right? And the Koreans will build us a reactor. They'll do it in 5 or 7 years, right? And they've got to do all these things, right? And a whole lot more.
Nice. A lot to think about.
A lot, yeah. You might need more than a day.
Get him in the seat. Well, Matt, we'll include a link in the description to your speech.
Yep.
Yes, and the 2 articles that we've referenced at the start of this, which was The Great Australian Scream and Put Another Aussie on the Barbie. We'll include that. But thank you for coming back. As always, an absolute pleasure hearing your views on all of this. And I know that a lot of people out there will walk away with a lot to think about. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Evan.
Thanks, man.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.